Derek knelt before the firing squad, broken, seconds from death. Then a silver warrior crashed from the sky and tore through them without a word. Her face was the last one he ever expected. But what happened next will leave you speechless. First, let's go back to the beginning. On the outermost reach of Coalition space, beyond the charts etched in any civilian archive, floated Outpost Meridian, a steel fragment suspended against the crimson haze of a dying star. The atmosphere inside was always dry, tinged with recycled air and faint ozone. For Captain Derek Walsh, it was home. He patrolled its narrow corridors and flickering terminals with practiced calm, the kind earned through the quiet dread of years without war, only the constant threat of it. Derek had long since traded dreams for duty. At 28, he was already a veteran of skirmishes no one in the core worlds talked about. Pirate insurrections, failed terraforming riots, fractured trade pacts turned violent. He had the kind of steadiness that came not from confidence, but from restraint. Diplomacy was his strength, or at least it had been, until the Alari arrived. Their delegation arrived in a ship that looked like molten glass, organic, breathing, and unsettling in the way it never made a sound when it landed. The Alari themselves were a study in contradiction, ethereal, almost too graceful, yet endlessly calculating. Sayla stood out immediately, not because she was young, but because she didn't care that she was. She moved through the corridors with the curiosity of a child and the defiance of someone determined to be taken seriously. At first, Derek humored her questions about gravity regulators, zero-G combat drills, Earth idioms. But she pushed further. She asked why he chose to serve, why peace mattered in a galaxy so indifferent to order, and then why he always looked tired when the others laughed. She was too sharp for her age, and it made him cautious. And yet, he let her follow. She watched him drill with recruits, listened as he debriefed skittish diplomats, sat beside him in the mess, and mimicked his dry humor with alarming precision. Her silvery skin shimmered subtly under the outpost's synthetic light, but it was her eyes, deep violet, unblinking when she spoke, that unsettled him. She was studying him like a language she intended to master. Then came the night she stood beside him on the observation deck, staring at the star bleeding through the glass like a dying heart. She whispered that she didn't want to leave, that she wanted to stay, to learn, to become. Derek didn't laugh. He didn't scoff. He simply looked away and said with all the kindness he could muster, "You're too young. Maybe one day, when you've lived a few more galaxies." It was meant to protect her. Instead, it broke something. She nodded. No tears, no argument. Just silence that lasted too long. The next morning, her quarters were empty. Her delegation departed early. Derek read the logs, stared at her name, and told himself it was better this way. But deep down, something inside him disagreed. The war had aged Derek Walsh in ways no calendar could quantify. 7 years since Outpost Meridian, and the idealism that once steadied his hands had long since been reduced to ash, along with most of the Orion Coalition. What remained was a patchwork of desperate alliances, thinning supply chains, and commanders who no longer asked why, only how long until the next strike. The Warmind Syndicate had emerged from the shadows like a serpent, silent, patient, coiling around the spine of the galaxy. They corrupted from within, seduced fringe colonies with promises of autonomy, and drowned resistance in precise, merciless fire. Derek had seen officers he trained turn against him. Stations he once protected now floated as wreckage. There were no declarations, no noble fronts, just attrition. War, distilled to its ugliest form. So when the rumors began, stories of a phantom commander who appeared where hope had long since died, he dismissed them. Soldiers invented myths to survive. A silver-skinned specter in Alari war armor. A woman who could call orbital strikes from gutted satellites, who trained human rebels and exiled defectors alike with equal brutality. Convenient fiction for fractured morale. Until the day the door to his war room hissed open and the myth stepped through. The effect was immediate. The room, mid-briefing, fell silent. Her presence bent the air, not with charisma but with force, worn and deliberate. Her armor was scorched in places, patched in others. It bore no insignia, no rank, just jagged streaks of obsidian over violet plating that clung to her like an exoskeleton. Dried blood darkened one gauntlet. Her eyes, those unmistakable violet eyes, met Derek's without blinking. There was no ceremony, no explanation. "I heard you needed a miracle," she said. Her voice was low, sharper now, with the rasp of someone used to screaming orders over cannon fire. Derek couldn't move. His mind staggered through the impossible truth. Sayla, that Sayla, stood before him, not as a curious girl trailing his steps, but as a forged blade, drawn from 7 years of conflict and solitude. He searched her face for something familiar. There was no warmth, no invitation, just command. And yet, beneath the composure, there it was, that burn, not vengeance, not contempt, something older, more personal, a quiet fury smoldering beneath the surface. Not at him, perhaps, but at the ghost of his words, the dismissal that shaped her journey. She had not returned to be acknowledged. She had returned to prove, and Derek, standing in the ashes of the man he once was, realized she already had. War stripped away pleasantries. It didn't leave room for nostalgia or mercy or the luxury of waiting for someone to change. In the months that followed Sayla's return, Derek saw the woman she'd become in unflinching detail, through the lens of carnage and command. She led like a storm, never from the rear, never with hesitation. When their convoy was pinned in the Naruan wastes, she plunged into the chaos first, turning a certain slaughter into a routed enemy retreat. When a syndicate broadcast scrambled Derek's fleet-wide comms, Sayla rerouted the signal herself, recalibrating alien tech with one bloodied hand, while the other clutched a fallen soldier's rifle. No one questioned her authority, not because she asked for it, but because she earned it in every scream, every cratered street, every smoke-choked corridor. The admiration came quickly. Too quickly. Derek watched as his lieutenants deferred to her without question. Their eyes followed her like gravity. They started echoing her principles: strike first, count losses later. Efficiency replaced caution. Cold logic replaced compassion. It terrified him, because he knew exactly where she learned it. But unlike him, Sayla hadn't developed restraint to cope with war. She had turned it into doctrine. Her playbook wasn't coalition regulation. It was survival at any cost, and that cost was growing. Civilians left behind during extraction. Supply runs diverted from refugee corridors. 5 medics lost in a daring outflank maneuver that did win the battle, but shattered morale for weeks. Derek confronted her in the dim glow of a field ops tent, his voice low but cracking with fury. "You made a choice that killed 5 of our own." She didn't flinch. "And saved 50. I did the math. You taught me to calculate outcomes, Derek." "No," he bit back. "I taught you to lead with purpose. You've become a weapon. That's not the same." Her face twisted, wounded, then locked behind steel. "You never wanted me as I was, just some quiet ideal to match your conscience. But I didn't survive to make you comfortable." The silence that followed was thick with the weight of everything unsaid. He wanted to tell her she mattered more than the war. He wanted to say he never meant to mold her into this, but the words caught in his throat. She turned before he could speak again. By morning, her gear was gone, her ship signature scrubbed. The only trace she left was a single transmission, clipped and cold. "I'm not fighting this war to be seen. I'm fighting because someone once told me I wasn't enough." That night, the syndicate struck with precision. They knew the weak points. Sayla had taken the fallback codes with her. Their stronghold collapsed in fire, and Derek, standing in the smoke, knew what he'd lost wasn't just a warrior. It was the last chance to tell her she had always been enough. New Kyoto was a corpse dressed in neon. What once shimmered with arcologies and cloud towers now lay twisted and blackened, a relic of fallen ambition scorched beneath orbital bombardment. The Warmind Syndicate didn't just conquer cities, they dismantled symbols. And Derek Walsh, bound and bleeding on the cracked plaza where the Coalition had once signed peace accords, was to be their next message. They streamed it live across the fringe systems, a final humiliation. The war hero brought to heel. His uniform was torn, face split above the brow, one eye swollen shut. He didn't look defiant. He looked finished, yet his spine refused to bend. Even kneeling, he didn't lower his head. The execution squad lined up in practiced silence. 10 soldiers, 10 rifles, 10 heartbeats before history severed one more thread. And then the sky screamed. It wasn't sound, but motion, kinetic, impossible, violent. A shock wave cleaved through the plaza, sending rifles skittering like dice. The first shot never came. Only a blur dropped from the heavens, trailing contrails like claw marks across the clouds. Gray armor, scarred and scorched, struck the earth with a thunderclap of fury. Sayla didn't announce herself. She moved with surgical wrath, spinning, slicing, unloading mag blades and plasma bursts with the cold elegance of a dancer who'd choreographed this violence in her dreams. One soldier dropped, then another, then 4 more before anyone could react. The rest ran, not out of cowardice, but because they understood. This wasn't a rescue. It was a reckoning. She reached Derek in 3 strides. Her breath came hard through her helmet, fogged for a beat before clearing. Without a word, she knelt, severed his restraints with a hot blade, and held out her hand, steady, deliberate, unshaking. Derek stared at it for a long moment, not out of fear, but shame. When he finally stood, shoulders slung around her for support, he whispered, "You came back." She didn't look at him. "You're the only one who ever saw who I could be, even when you didn't believe in it yourself." He absorbed the weight of her words, every unspoken wound wrapped in restraint, every scar carved by choices made in his name. She had become everything he feared and everything he hoped for, and all without his permission. He took her hand again, not as a superior, not to guide, but to walk beside. "I was wrong, Sayla. You were never too young. I just wasn't ready to see the fire standing in front of me." She didn't cry. She didn't speak, but her mouth pulled into something that almost resembled a smile, sharp, lopsided, tinged with irony. They moved through the ashes of New Kyoto, 2 silhouettes against a blood-orange sky, not leading, not following, forged in fire, tempered by silence, bound by the unspoken. And across 100 war fronts, the name Sayla returned like a rumor, but never alone. She had a title now, one whispered by enemies with dread and by allies with awe. The warrior who chose a man worth saving.